We're going to go ahead and get started. There's going to be some people straggling in. I want to begin by introducing myself. I very often start these programs and forget to tell people who I am, so the very first line up here is, I am Janet. My name is Janet Denhart. I am the director of the Price School in Sacramento, and I would like to welcome you all to the USC Price Policy Forum on Higher Education, Affordability, and Quality. I am delighted that you're all here. I want to acknowledge a couple of special guests. We've got the Honorable Carlos Gutierrez Gonzalez, the Consul General of Mexico in Sacramento. We've got a lot of important legislative staff here that we want to welcome you as well. And Assembly Member Reginald Jones Sawyer has agreed to kick us off with a couple of comments. I want to point out that the Assembly member is a USC alum and a Price School alum.
Oh.
Good afternoon. Okay, we can try that. Much better. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Not only, actually, I'm gonna date myself. I was in the School of Public Administration, and so that we're talking about going way back, and we've had several names since then. But I am a proud alumnus of the Price School of Public Policy, and I'm also the Assembly member of the 59th Assembly District, which in shorthand means I represent USC. I get to represent my alma mater. And as anybody knows, if you're an Assembly person, you get an opportunity to represent your alma mater. That's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I've been past president of the Black Alumni Board of Governors, so I'm heavily involved in what USC does. I'm especially glad to be here with you today because I'm on higher education, and I insisted when I talked to the speaker about what committees I wanted to be on. I wanted to be on higher ed because I think that's the future of California. When I was at the School of Public Administration, I remember what we, and I say we, California did in 1960, where we made education a priority with our master plan. And we basically made education, higher education, free for everyone. And I see you have affordability and quality up there. We've always had quality UC, CSU, and community colleges in the state. We just needed to make them affordable. We made that investment, and which is what I'm telling my colleagues in the Assembly now. When we made that investment back in 1960, we all of a sudden became an international economic powerhouse because we had quality people here who were better educated than anyone else in the country, and if you wanted a quality workforce, you came to California. And so by the time I graduated in 1979, and then when I first started working, I started hearing about how California if it were a nation, it was like the 5th largest economic agent country in the world. And that's phenomenal that one country can do that. And I attribute it to the fact that we had the type of educational system we had. Then, unfortunately, we had this horrible, horrible recession. And within 6 years, all of that came crumbling down. I think we may have fallen down to maybe 7th or 8th economically. The reason I say that is because, one, it tells you how long it takes to build that kind of infrastructure. It doesn't happen overnight. But most important, it also tells you how quickly it can evaporate if we don't continue to do the things we did to become that. And that's, one, making higher education affordable, and two, making sure it's the best quality education you can get in the world. So I'm glad you have this distinguished panel here today to talk about it. I tell my colleagues over in the Capitol, where's the Capitol? Every day, when you're a freshman, you don't know where anything is for a while. That ultimately, the way California is going to come out of this recession, the way that California will get back to where we are, is we have to make the investment. So I work every day to lower the costs of education in California, and hopefully you can come up with some ideas on how we can make that happen. And most important, you can help me in my fight to make sure that this is the best educated state in the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Jack Knott. He is the Dean of the USC Price School, and he's going to be moderating the panel and introducing our panelists.
Thank you very much, Janet, and also thank you, Reggie, for those remarks. You've been a great supporter of our school and the higher education system in California, and know how dedicated you are, and we're hopeful that the kind of information and so on we present today will be of benefit. I want to welcome everybody. Also, on behalf of the University of Southern California and the Price School, Sacramento Center, we're dealing with obviously an exceedingly important topic, one that has major implications for social progress as well as economic development in the state, but also in the country. You know, it was 50 years ago that policymakers and the higher education officials adopted the higher education plan for California, and that plan is really pretty much the policy that still exists today. I recently reviewed a manuscript for an academic journal that was identifying factors that explain the growth in outstanding higher education systems in some of the states following World War II. And the study showed that rapid population growth, generous state budgets, a favorable climate towards higher education, and a strong growing economy were really key to the development of these higher education systems. And California was also very benefited by the fact that the state has both an outstanding private higher education system and outstanding public higher education system, which a lot of people don't forget about. There's very few states that have that combination. I come from Illinois out here, and that's one of the other states but many of them have one or the other, like in New England or in many of the western states. And we know that today, many of these favorable conditions identified in this study no longer hold. The context is really very, very different, leading to the really important need at this juncture to re-examine our higher education policy. So that today we're facing a much different situation. We have a higher education system that's characterized by threats to its quality, by a mismatch between the demand in the economy for highly educated workers and the supply of those workers, and an inadequate preparation for and access to higher education by some key groups in society. And that combination of factors, I believe, is an overall threat to the continued high-quality, affordable system that we've come to know in California as being really, in many respects, the best system in the world. So I'm really honored today to serve as the moderator for today's panel, and I hope that each of you will find our discussion not only informative, but also thought-provoking. We have some outstanding panelists with us today who will speak from differing perspectives and about differing aspects of the higher education system in California. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce our panel. And I'm going to begin with the person to my immediate left, Nick Lee. He's the Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's responsible for making grants focusing on college completion, data systems and metrics, and providing a fiscal and policy lens. He previously worked at the White House Office of Management and Budget, formulating policies, interestingly enough, both for the Bush and then the Obama administrations around student aid agendas, especially the $150 billion that's spent annually on Pell Grants and student loan programs. And prior to working for the OMB, he served in the U.S. Department of Education and with the U.S. Senate focused on post-secondary education and social policy. So we're really pleased that you are here, Nick. Next to Nick is Patricia Gandhar.
Gandhara.
She is a professor and co-director of the Civil Rights Project at UCLA. She is the former director of education research in the California Assembly and formerly served as commissioner for post-secondary education for the state of California. Dr. Gandhara has written extensively on higher education access and is author of several reports and books on this topic, including The Latino Education Crisis, The Consequences of Failed Social Policies, which was published by Harvard University Press in 2009. I would then like to introduce next to Patricia is Bill Turney. He's a professor and director of the Puglia Center for Higher Education at USC. He is also the president of the American Education Research Association. His research focuses on three things: increasing access to higher education, improving the performance of post-secondary institutions, and analyzing the quality of for-profit institutions. He is currently involved in a life history project of low-income, first-generation high school students en route to college. And he's really a renowned scholar in this field and has received grants recently from the Gates Foundation and from the U.S. Department of Justice. And then on my far left is Dr. David Plank. He is the Executive Director of Policy Analysis for the California Education and a professor in Stanford's Graduate School of Education. He previously taught at Michigan State University, where he founded and directed the Education Policy Center. He is a prolific author and editor, and his works include, and I don't know if this is pronounced AERA, Handbook of Education Policy Research. In addition, he has served as a consultant to many prominent international organizations, as well as to governments in Africa and Latin America. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. So we will follow this format. Each panel member will have approximately 7 to 8 minutes and to give some opening remarks, and then we'll follow that with a short discussion between the moderator and the panelists, if that evolves in that direction, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. So as we go through the panel, please think of questions and issues that you'd like to raise, because we're going to make sure we leave plenty of time for discussion at the end. We're going to start with Dr. Bill Turney, and he is going to give an overview of the issues facing higher education in California, and also look at the questions of capacity and access. So, Bill.
Thank you. So I have 8 points in 8 minutes. I have 50 slides, and I'm not going to use them. But that means you need to pay attention, and there's a test at the end that you know the 8 points. So here we go. The first point is that participation rates in higher education need to go up. High-wage jobs demand an educated workforce. The United States now lags behind other industrialized countries in terms of an educated workforce. The United States is 14th in the percentage of educated workers in terms of industrialized countries. So we're falling behind in the global human capital. President Obama's mentioned that, the Gates Foundation, Lumina Foundation, numerous workforce studies have said that. By 2025, California will face an estimated shortfall of 1 million workers with skills learned in college. What does that mean? It means that we need slightly fewer than 100,000 new students every year participating for the next decade. That's my first point. My second point is that we will not need a workforce in 2025 where 100% has a bachelor's degree or even an AA degree. The expectations are that about 40% of California's workforce will need a bachelor's degree in 2025. Another 30% will need some form of a post-secondary degree, an AA degree, perhaps a certificate. For another 30%, a high school degree will be sufficient. Now, such a point is important because it helps define what we as a state are going to expect of high schools. When we speak of college readiness, we actually should be speaking of college and career readiness. We need to look at other countries such as Germany and their career readiness programs. This point has important implications that we can return to in our discussions. One implication has to do with tracking. Who gets a high school degree and who doesn't, or a college degree? A second has to do with how we work with students who are the least academically inclined. A college for all curriculum has very specific implications. Nevertheless, my initial point still holds. We need to increase the number of students participating in the post-secondary sector. My third point, one problem is that we have to deal with college readiness. In Los Angeles, we have what's called A through G requirements. If you take those classes, you're likely to be admitted to CSU or UC. We use A through G requirements as shorthand for college ready. If you take A through G, you're college ready. But we all know that students who go to the CSU, about 60% of them have to take a remedial class or more. Even 20% of entering UC students have to take remedial classes. College ready to me means you're college ready. It doesn't mean that you take non-credit bearing classes to get up to snuff. It also doesn't mean that if your writing skills need remediation, that you're encouraged to take an advanced placement class in high school. What we are doing is creating a two-tiered system where we say everyone is college ready when some are and some are not. My fourth point pertains to that college readiness also pertains to college knowledge. College readiness is not just about academic skills. It also has to do with non-cognitive abilities that some of us will call college knowledge, time management, note-taking, financial literacy. Many of the students who I work with need to participate in higher education don't understand how post-secondary education works. They don't know how to navigate it because our post-secondary institutions largely do not exhibit an ethic of care. Improving college and career readiness in high schools suggests three things. First, we will reduce the dropout rates in high schools. Second, we will increase the college-going rate. And third, we will improve the college readiness rates. Now, my fifth point is that capacity constraints are a problem in public post-secondary institutions. The problem is that our public institutions, under current constraints, cannot take many more students. And it seems unlikely that we're going to build a new campus. UC Merced took 20 years to talk about before we opened the doors. It cost us $500 million and 5,000 students now go there. Although existing campuses could take more students, if it is only designed in a traditional manner, more faculty teaching students in classes and seats, then few of us expect that we'll meet the demand. The wrenching operational and cultural shifts needed to enable dramatic increases in public higher education appear impossible, given the current practices and practices of public sector boards, administrators, and faculty. My sixth point, community colleges deserve particular attention. 1.5 million students attend California's community college system. Now get this, 400,000 of them say that they want to transfer to a four-year institution. Last year, about 50,000 actually did. About 50% say they want an AA degree. After 5 years, only 15% did. About 80% need remedial coursework that they can take again and again. Summer classes have been canceled on many campuses. The real question to ask is, what do we want our community colleges to do? Because they can't do everything. My 7th point, for-profit institutions present possibilities and challenges. If the public post-secondary sector is hemmed in by size and tradition, then what do we do to increase capacity? Private nonprofit institutions could help, but there it's around the margins. Institutions like National University could make a bit of a difference, and there are a variety of institutions like that, but they're not going to create transformational change. Why did the legislature, however, create a transfer agreement between the community colleges and the CSU, but not involve the privates or even the UC? The other possibility is the for-profit sector. Now, I don't want to get into a debate at this moment about their pros and cons. There's some good ones, there's some horrible ones. But at a time when we need to increase college going dramatically, I really think we have to have all hands on deck. My last point, what do we do? Now, this is extra credit because I've got 5 suggestions. Improve time to degree by reducing the accumulation of unnecessary credit. It's simply crazy that we've got students who can't get into the courses they need, so they unknowingly take other classes which count for nothing. Streamline the curriculum. B, increase transfer rates by ensuring courses count at all 4-year institutions. Transfer holds great potential, but not the way we do it. Part of Steinberg's bill could be thought of as a version of transfer, but if not rightly configured, it will change nothing. C, reduce remedial classes in 4-year institutions by offering summer preparation courses. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We know that a summer slump exists. We know that summer melt exists for the least prepared students. What do? Capitalize on times when students aren't meeting, like summer. D, target clear learning outcomes in basic writing and math. We cannot lower standards. We have to clarify what we want students to learn and have them learn it. Finally, my last point, free us from proxies for learning. The professor is a proxy for learning. Credits and degrees are a proxy for learning. Credits equal seat time, which is a proxy for learning. We need to be clearer about what we intend students to learn, and if we are, learning will be speeded up. I'll stop now.
Very good. Thank you very much, Bill. You've laid out 8 points in, I think, less than 8 minutes, and also 5 policy recommendations in about a minute and a half. So that's certainly efficient. We're going to now turn to David Plank. David will talk to us about alternative modes of delivering education, including distance learning, as well as cost and quality related to those modes.
Okay, well, I'm slightly less organized than Bill, so I just have 2 points which I'm hoping to get through in 8 minutes. And those of you who come to PACE seminars will know that I'm very happy to be here because our seminars meet in the basement of the Weinstock building, and this is like, seeing the sunlight during a meeting like this is really nice for me.
It's a high-class university.
Yes, well, I'm sticking to USC from here on out. I'm telling you, this is really nice. I'm going to start with 2 quick stories. I was born in Chicago, and everybody knows that Chicago is a very tough-minded town. So when John D. Rockefeller wanted to establish a university in Chicago, the first thing that he did was to hire an architect who built a neo-Gothic, it was called Collegiate Gothic in the day, university, and put a lot of gargoyles on the corners of the buildings, because of course nothing says high-quality university like gargoyles. That was a century ago. That was a long time ago. But when I lived in Chicago, there was a campus of the University of Illinois called Circle Campus, to those of us who were around in the day. Circle was a satellite of the University of Illinois. And I had a friend who taught there, and he said he knew that they were making a move at Circle when they tore down a building and put in grass. Because nothing says high-quality university like students in flip-flops and shorts playing Frisbee on grass. Right? So, and now, lo and behold, Circle Campus is now the University of Illinois at Chicago, its own campus. So what does this have to do with technology? We're very preoccupied with quality, and this builds on Bill's last point. We're very preoccupied with the quality of online courses. We ask ourselves, can online instruction match in-class instruction? And the real question is, how would we know? right? That quality in higher education is very difficult to measure, and it's very, very rarely attempted. And what we rely on instead are the proxies that Bill talked about: seat time, credits, the prestige of the university. We suppose that those are indicators of quality, but that's not necessarily the case. So as we think about online education in California, we're investing huge energy in making sure that the online alternatives that we develop are of very high quality. But we invest almost nothing in ensuring the quality of the classes that we provide to students when they actually show up. So this is not to disparage the importance of quality by any means, but to say that the baseline for our consideration of what constitutes quality online education is very blurry at best, that we're not certain what a good quality education would look like. And there's a real possibility that online instruction could be better than in-class instruction, and we have to be open to that possibility. The second key question is online instruction less costly? If we're going to increase access by expanding online education, then there have to be some economies of scale. There has to be some opportunity for us to save money and thereby increase access. And Governor Brown is certainly committed to the idea that greater reliance on digital technology should expand access in California and reduce costs. But there won't be any savings. I think it's fair to say there won't be any savings if we regard online education simply as a build-out of the current existing institutional structures. That, in fact, my experience in 3 or 4 different universities is that online instruction costs more. Okay, the University of California, Stanford certainly, Michigan State have invested a lot of resources in creating online programs, and a lot of it involves stipends to faculty to develop online courses, because faculty, like me, for example, are perfectly happy just to teach their classes in a classroom and go home at night. And if you ask them, well, now put it online, they say, well, that would be fine, except that's extra time, that's extra effort, I'm not publishing when I'm doing that, so pay me more. So if we do it within the existing institutional structure, it's not going to save us anything. It may, in fact, cost us money. So technology will not have much impact on cost or quality if it's simply an extension of the existing institutional arrangement in California. But it has the potential, or from a different perspective, it raises the danger of unbundling the traditional set of services that colleges provide. Okay. That technology can separate the ownership of content from classroom instruction. It can separate student learning from credentialing, which is part of what Bill just talked about. It can separate quality from gargoyles and grass. And I think, from California's point of view, the changes, the advent of online instruction is already here. The trains have left the station. The availability of online alternatives is growing by the day. And California really needs to develop a policy framework that ensures that these changes benefit students rather than just large corporations or other actors. And I really do think that this is the key to resolving our issues around quality and affordability.
Okay.
Great statement.
Yeah.
Did you guys hear that? I mean, that's quite a statement.
You want to, David, why don't you repeat that last statement? And, say that one more time.
What I said is I think that developing a policy framework that takes advantage of these new technologies and ensures that they are beneficial to students is really the key to California's ability to resolve the challenges that we face with regard to quality and affordability.
I think we're going to be coming back to that in a little bit. Now we're going to turn to Patricia Gandhar.
Yes, thank you.
And Patricia is going to speak about diversity and access and how those are related to quality as well.
And I even have overheads, although I was the person who said, oh no, let's not do overheads. But, I
Trying
have
to
some
make
numbers.
herself look a little better than the rest of us, so the rest of us didn't have overhead.
Actually, it's because I have some numbers, and I think they're really important numbers for you to see and be able to focus on. And I suppose I could say that my aspirations are somewhat higher than David's, but significantly lower than Bill's, because I have 3 points that I want to leave you with. And the first point I want to leave you with after we run through this quickly is that there are massive inequities in California higher education. The second point is that those inequities hurt all of us, not just the kids who aren't making it. They hurt all of us. And the third is that because we have these inequities because for the most part they are structural problems in our system. And I don't believe that they're going to be solved without structural solutions. So that's where I want this to end. The first thing I want to call your attention to is, I think it's, we hear this all the time. I think, this is not news to anybody, but sometimes it's important to simply look at the hard numbers about who our higher education population is in this state, at least those that are considered the traditional 18 to 24-year-olds. In 2000, 36% of the students were white students. By 2011, that had declined to 31%. Obviously, the most significant change here and the most compelling one for what's happening in this state is the Latino population in 2000 at 42.5%, and 2 years ago was basically 46%, climbing towards 50% very quickly. What that means in summary is that what we've referred to as underrepresented minorities are no longer the minority, and they have increased from 50% in 2000 of the 18 to 24-year-old population to 55% of that age group. So this is who we are educating in California, or not educating. So, beginning to get at some of the structural issues here. Those students who go directly to the University of California in this state, 14% of whites, 36% of Asian students, 9% of Latinos, and 9% of blacks go directly to the top-tier institution. The majority of all of our students, but especially Latino and African American students, the majority go to our community colleges. We built the system this way. We built the system to funnel the great majority of our students into the community colleges. And what we have ended up with is that, in large part, Latinos, the 69% of whom go straight to the community college, have little tradition in their communities or their families to going to a four-year institution. They don't go because of cost. We know that many of them qualify to go to a four-year institution, but they don't go because of a lack of tradition, because a lack of money, and because of a lack of information about simply how to do that. So what happens once these students get to the community college? The great majority of our students across the board in California. Well, there's enormous debate about this. I put some numbers up there. Anybody in the room can argue with these numbers. Anybody on the panel can argue with the numbers because there is no real number. But this, I think, is one of the best studies that's been done. It's by PPIC. It's longitudinal. They look for 7 years what happens in terms of transfers. And they find that after 7 years, 30% of white students who met certain criteria to, I think it's having taken one college transfer course plus some other things so that we're sure these are really the students who wanted to transfer. 30% of them have transferred. 41% of Asians have transferred. 19% of African Americans have transferred. And 17% of Latinos have transferred. Now, that doesn't mean they got a degree. That just means that they met that first hurdle. This is really important. I want to make this point. Because it's terribly important for everyone to be aware of. And that is that we have a lot of data now that show that if you control for your grades and your test scores, so let's say everybody with the same grades and the same test scores, if you go to a four-year college directly, your chances of getting a degree are dramatically higher than if you go to a two-year college. Controlling for grades and test scores, the same kind of kid. There's a big piece of this is the institution itself. So what do we end up with in California? We end up with, this is a five-year average in 2010, that about 43.5% of white students get a degree by the time they're 34 years old in California. That's actually a little bit higher than the nation as a whole. Almost 60% of Asians get a degree, and that's pretty much the same as the nation as a whole. 11% of Latinos will have a degree by the time they're 34. And that too. I mean, actually, our numbers in California look very much like the rest of the nation, with the exception of we're doing a little bit better for some reason. I think it might be that we're importing them. We're doing a little bit better with African Americans. But what's obviously important to see here is that this population that is rapidly becoming half of all of our students is the least likely to get a degree, and by a big margin. This spells disaster for this state. And if you if you put together Latinos, African Americans, and Native Americans, that's 55% of our students are the least likely to get a degree. So a little sense of California's rankings. California enrolls the lowest proportion of students in four-year institutions of all states in the nation. We have the lowest percentage of enrollment in four-year institutions, about 26%. We are 49th in the nation in the percent of underrepresented high school graduates who enroll in four-year institutions. And we are 45th in the nation with respect to BA completion among minorities. So we are nationally, in national terms, doing pretty much at the bottom of the barrel in terms of getting our underrepresented students educated. So let me now end with, so let's say the problem were fundamentally this lack of transfer, going to community college and then not transferring. What if we were to solve that? Well, if we were to solve that problem, that would be great, but it wouldn't fix our problem in California because we cannot accommodate all of the students that need to have a four-year education in our four-year institutions. What we need to do, what I want to end on is what we need to do is seek out the most cost-effective solutions to this problem. I'm going to depart from where David is going and say that I think that solution should not be distance education, because I want to get into a little conversation afterwards about the critical importance of social capital, about who you go to school with and the environment in which you are in school and how much of a difference that makes. That harks back to if you go to a four-year school initially, you've got a bigger chance of getting a degree. So my argument would be that going the distance route would in fact take the heaviest toll on the underrepresented students who are now not getting degrees.
Good. Thank you very much, Patricia, for those numbers and really interesting, although depressing, statistics that you shared with us. Our final panelist is going to be Nick Lee. Nick will talk about papers commissioned by the Gates Foundation that focus on financial aid and its various policy implications.
Great. So, yeah, works. So first of all, thank you very much, USC, for hosting this critically important panel, not just for certainly the state of California, but also for the nation. Just want to touch very briefly on why the Gates Foundation is involved in its post-secondary work. Across everything that the Gates Foundation does, all of it's guided by two principles. One is the fact that all lives have equal value, and the other is that everyone deserves a chance at a healthy and productive life. And what this translates into for its post-secondary work is that low-income young adults have the opportunity to complete a high-quality, affordable education that's tailored to their particular individual needs and that leads to a sustaining career. For the Gates family and for all the folks that work at the foundation, its post-secondary work is really one about equity and opportunity. It's really focused on closing the persistent and unfortunately growing income disparities that exist here in our country today. And so what does that mean in terms of our actual work? Much like the panelists have touched on, it's pretty obvious that given the goals that we've set for ourselves in terms of post-secondary attainment, that it's not going to happen by, finding a little bit of efficiency here and there, wringing the sponge a little bit more. It really requires a pretty radical sort of transformation of the entire business model around education that ultimately produces more degrees of equal or higher quality than the current system today, and that does so at a more affordable cost to students. And so what this means for the foundation in terms of just a few of the levers that we have invested significantly in, everything from investing in redesigning of courseware to deliver various forms of education, whether it's developmental education or more of the core classes to do that. Evaluating MOOCs. Everybody's been thinking and talking about MOOCs. I know it's been an issue of importance here in this state in particular. So it's understanding whether or not these methods of delivery actually do deliver the education that they purport to deliver and does so in a quality fashion. We are also looking a lot at designing new models of delivery that frankly decouple the idea of learning from how long one's butt has been sitting in a chair. How might you do that? How might you evaluate or allow a student to demonstrate the competency or attaining mastery of a particular competency in a particular educational program? And finally, and perhaps not of least importance, is really funding folks to do the necessary research to create the metrics that allow folks to evaluate in an unbiased manner the impact of these forms of education, and then ultimately to make the appropriate decisions that they might want to make in regards to these programs. Obviously for students in terms of how much they want to spend and where they want to invest their tuition dollars, in institutions in terms of the right data that they might need to wring improvement from their particular educational programs, and certainly from policymakers who have to make big picture macro decisions every day. My lens into the foundation's work on higher education is through federal policy, specifically around financial aid. Not only it's because of my background of having worked in the federal government, but also, frankly, because of the significant amount of leverage that the federal financial aid system brings to bear. $150 billion a year, roughly a third of every institution in this country. It's a third of their revenue. And so the question is, how might the policies around the aid system create the right enabling environment that would lead to the experimentation and ultimately scaling potentially of alternative models occur, and or creating the right incentives for students and institutions and the other various stakeholders in this large system to kind of start rowing in the right direction. One of my projects that I want to spend a little bit of time focusing on is the Reimagining Aid Design and Delivery project that a few of you may have done a little bit of reading on if you've been looking at all at the higher education trade press. While this project is focused certainly on federal financial aid, I think you will quickly find that a lot of the conditions and the analysis and the solutions that people come up with will certainly be applicable to this particular state. So last August, the Gates Foundation began the Reimagining Aid Design and Delivery, or RAD project, as we call it. There were several reasons why we did that. Obviously, folks are well aware of the budgetary challenges that are being faced broadly at the federal level, and the student aid programs are not immune from such conversations. There is a looming budget shortfall in the Pell Grant program, obviously the foundational grant assistance program to low-income individuals here in this country. There are obviously also some of the imperatives around post-secondary education that folks here on the panel have talked about today: the need for affordable education, the need for greater completion, the need for more folks to fill empty jobs that sit in today's today's workforce. The other reason why we wanted to get involved with the RAD project was frankly because the solution set on financial aid and how to think about it creatively didn't really exist. In the past, the answer had always been more money is the answer, or don't do anything different. And as you might imagine, that creates a pretty significant chilling effect on folks who might want to think creatively about how this massive federal resource might be better aligned to get to the right solution. And so what we did, what we wanted the grantees to do really was to start shifting the conversation away from a budget-focused Pell solution set to one that looked broadly at the entire aid system and how it might create the right incentives for a system that not only focuses on access, but more importantly, access and success. And so we made 16 grants, about $2 million to organizations that span the entire waterfront, institutions, business, think tanks, and most importantly, the student groups. And we asked them to conduct research, do the right analysis, and what happened is that over the last 2 or 3 months, they've come out with white papers that some of you may be reading about that put forth some very interesting shared principles and, more importantly, specific policy options that have, frankly, spurred a conversation that we hope will continue as kind of the federal policymaking gears start grinding towards a Higher Education Act reauthorization. Very high level principles, from creating a more simple and predictable financial aid system to one that focuses its aid on the neediest of students, to some more, we'll call them controversial design principles that would start putting in place stronger institutional incentives, or to start rationalizing the student loan repayment system that exists today that results in many folks in a state of default, unfortunately. The reaction has been widespread, and we've been very pleased that there have been significant folks that have engaged in the conversation. As you might know, yesterday alone there were 2 congressional hearings on the issue around higher education access and affordability. And we're hoping that that dialogue will continue to shift and build as reauthorization will hopefully start moving along at the end of this year and the early part of next year. Over the next few months, I know the Gates Foundation is going to continue to stay involved by hoping that more folks join this reform conversation and start populating it with the right ideas that frankly have been missing for far too long to spur the necessary debate that would lead to the right system that we're hoping for. And I think I'm running out of time, so I will save the other points I have for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Nick. Well, as you can see, this is a complicated set of issues that involves technology. It involves issues of ethnicity. Okay. And it involves issues of budget and finance. This is a very complicated issue. I would like to ask at least one, maybe 2 general questions, and then I have a couple specific questions for individuals. The general question I have, let me state the question, let me then explain why I'm interested in this. It seems to me that the public education system, higher education system in California is going to have to start looking a lot more like the private higher education system in California does. This is really what has happened in Michigan and other states. If you take the University of Michigan, for example, as a prime example, it's more or less a private institution. You could imagine. So why do I ask this? I ask this because the state is been in a financial crisis and is unlikely to be funding higher education at the level it did in the past. It used to fund it at 7% of its budget. It now funds it at 4%. It's not likely to go back up to 7%. Second, the priorities in health care and in prisons and criminal justice have grown dramatically, and I don't see that changing. I don't see healthcare as becoming a much smaller part of the budget and higher education becoming larger. So I don't see in the near future any changes in the kind of support. It's going to continue to decline. It's on a secular downward trend. That combination of policy priorities and budget. Second, the response to this has been really, I think, threatening to the kind of system that California has. The number of portion of students coming out of high school that end up going into the CSU or the UC system has fallen from something like 22 to 18% overall. The class sizes have gone up. Fewer faculty have been hired. There's a huge number of very negative consequences. So if you continue down that road, this is not going to be a very attractive future for public higher education in California. So one alternative, and that's my question, is maybe, UCLA, UC San Diego, Berkeley, whoever, ought to start looking a lot more like Stanford and USC. They ought to be raising much bigger endowments from the private sector. They ought to be charging differential tuition based on those who can pay and those who can't, and so on. So does anybody see that as a likely future or even a desirable future?
I'll let your temperature drop a degree or two before. So
I have an ice pack if you need to.
So I just want to say two things. One thing that you didn't mention, Jack, is that tuition in both UC and CSU has tripled over the last decade.
Yeah, we have gone from being one of the lowest cost public education systems in the country to now, if you take the UC system and CSU system, we are one of the very most expensive.
One of the more expensive, and once upon a time we promised a free education to everyone. Now we are among the most costly in the U.S.
Yeah.
The other point to make is just in response to your last point is that's already happening. That Berkeley, I believe, has about doubled the number of international and out-of-state students that they're accepting this year, and it's likely to double again.
Right.
Because those students pay full freight, where California students pay less. And they're certainly making an aggressive effort to tap their alumni networks to generate endowment resources, and aggressively seeking research funding to make up for what the state no longer provides. The problem is that we're really talking about three institutions in the public sector that can do that, which is Berkeley, UCLA, and UCSD. Mm-hmm. That the other UCs and almost none of the CSUs have those kinds of alternatives available to them. So that's we can take a little slice off that if Berkeley, UCLA, UCSD were to demand less from the state, take a little slice off the problem, but it's not
a general solution, but could be the right solution for those three
institutions. Yeah.
So I'm going to argue that that's not the solution. We have 10 UC campuses. What is it, 30? What do we have, 32, 33 CSUs? And we have 112 community colleges where most of our students are. We also have some very high-performing community colleges. It's very uneven, but near every UC campus, there is a very high-performing community college that is doing an excellent job of moving students into the four-year sector. I'm going to argue that we ought to be thinking about tapping these 112 institutions that we have, where we fund them at about half the amount of money per student that we fund the K-12 system for, and yet expect them to take on these Herculean challenges. I think we need to go to our community colleges. We need to assess where the strengths are in those colleges, and we need to start building these out as four-year baccalaureate degree granting institutions. We wouldn't be the first to do this. Something like 17 other states have authorized this kind of a move in their own states, and I believe that we could, in this way, making them more like private institutions, making the UCs more private, which we are doing, is in fact creating greater and greater problems for what I argue is our biggest problem in this state, and that is serving the students that we have who are least likely to get degrees. That will decrease the likelihood. But expanding the community college sector into some degree-granting institutions would have the opposite effect. It would capture the students where they are and increase the chances that we can get degrees, good degrees, into the hands of that sector that we are underserving now.
Bill?
No. The devil's in the details here, right? So let's recognize that today that really what we're speaking of is degrees of privateness. a for-profit institution, if public aid went away, federal and state public aid went away, for-profits would go away. 90% of their money comes from students who get federal grants and state grants. So one thing, do we need to make publics more private? It strikes me as crazy today. We don't really have a master plan anymore. But if we were in this room to create a master plan, talking about the citizens and students of California, to not include all the post-secondary institutions in the state is crazy. It sectors things off in a particular way. Now, what Patricia's saying is true. I would agree with that. But, you know, in some respects, in the UC system, we have the worst of worst worlds. So, well, we bet all of them got to be exactly the same. Do we really need do we need 10 research universities in this state? And I'm not saying that we don't, but we don't have any answer to that. The point that Nick made a moment ago is true. God forbid that we should change that we would have two sectors of, you know, a Santa Cruz on one sector and a UCLA in another sector. But we all have to offer our own English 101 because, you know, my English 101 is going to be different than your English 101. Do we really need that? Is it inconceivable for us to think that we can create some type of public-private partnership where we would offer some type of English 101 that is not horrible, that would be more efficient and effective for all of our students, that everybody would take? And that's some degree of privateness, but it's not going entirely private.
Did you want to add anything to this?
Just a very brief comment that I would have is I think we're already in this world right now where you're having people whose access is cut off, and guess where they're going?
Right.
They're going to the for-profits because those are the only people that have seats open. And I think where we look at this from the Gates Foundation perspective is we're almost agnostic to some extent to what your tax status is as an institution. It's a question of, given your particular institution, how can we help you serve more students, particularly students that we care about, better?
You know, the challenge of the community colleges is how we define this. So we say that they are inexpensive because the cost is inexpensive. But recognize what Patricia said in her talk. If your son or daughter is going to get a bachelor's degree, inevitably, and you know something, you're going to tell them to go to a four-year institution because the cost of sending a student to an AA degree, if we figure it one way, that student in terms of actually getting a bachelor's degree is more expensive than sending them to the CSU because so few get through.
Yeah, for the state. It's
right,
more expensive for the state. Yeah.
And for the student.
Okay. Very interesting responses. There's one other element of this that I want to ask. And it goes more to Patricia's points than some of the others before we open it up. It came out of, I think the studies, again, by PPIC, but it struck me, and that is if you take adults that are 50 to 65, in California, a higher proportion of them have BA degrees than do younger adults. And that difference is, you know, something like 32% to 24%, right? That is not the case in the rest of the country. There's a little bit of, you know, it's almost the same. You know, it's in the rest of the country, it's around 29% for the older group, like me, and then the younger group, right? But in California, the younger group is not going to college at the same rate as the people, you know, sitting on this panel. And, well, I don't know how old you are, Nick. Maybe you're in that younger group, but you're in one of those exceptions. And in addition, at the same time, you're getting the kind of differentiation. If you look at kids 18 to 24, college-age kids who are Latino, you say, well, it's going to be 55%. But Our Tomas Rivera Policy Institute looked at first to third graders in Los Angeles, and it's like 70% are Latino. And this group in particular has lower educational achievement. And so when you start adding those kinds of things together, there's, my question is, how do we deal with this declining enrollment and success with getting a college degree of this younger group compared to what we had before, given that the earlier, I can't remember who did the statistics, I think it was Bill, on needing around 40% of the population needing college degrees to meet the kind of technological global economy that we're going to have in 2025. That is, to me, one of the big questions. So
I sometimes think, Jack, I sometimes think that I don't know the answer to your question about how we get out of this, but I do feel that my generation needs to be shamed, and the generation that supported, my generation. Because when I went off to college, I had no money, and the state and the federal government invested in me. I mean, that's how I got an education, because other people invested in me.
That was true for me as well.
Yes. And so now I look at this generation that I teach at the University of California, and we're not investing in them. And we are reaping what we sow. These horrible numbers. I don't know, other than to point out to people that the reason we are here is because folks invested in us. And the reason we have this problem is because we have disinvested in our youth. And I think that there is a moral problem there.
One of the, we have a faculty member in our school, Professor Dahl Myers, who looks at the demographics of this and who votes. And the voting is disproportionately people who are white and older and male, whereas the future population is as we described. And so this could be kind of a political transition.
And Dahl makes the point, he's a wonderful colleague, Dahl makes the point that if we don't educate this population that is coming up, there's going to be nobody to support the pensions, the Social Security of the group that's going out. So they are going to feel the pinch.
So I think the one comment I would make is that, and it's a question that I've been posing through this entire project that I've been leading, and it's a question that's a very live debate in Washington, which is it solely about the money? Is it just about investment? And I think there's a fair question to be raised about how those dollars are invested. Are they aligned the right way? And I think that's the tough question that face policymakers every day, and frankly the dialogue that we're trying to spur. I mean, I think raising awareness around these general issues is important, right? You talk about how do you get people to focus on this issue? Well, raise awareness of it. You all approach the completion question from one angle, which was X% of people based on these demographics have a college degree. I think that if you flip the answer the other way, you get a far different conversation, and frankly a far scarier conversation, which is what are the percentage of the people that start in a BA program, how many finish in 6 years? Right. The answer is 50%. Amongst low-income Latinos and blacks, that number goes to 25%. Look at the demographic in your state. That's a far scarier story to tell, and frankly the one that people don't really hear too much about. And so when I look at those numbers and I look at sort of the fiscal resources that we have, I say that yes, we would all like more money. I think that'd be great. I agree that we need to continue investing in students here in this state and across the country, but absent the money, what else can be done? And that's really what we're focused on.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that before we? Okay.
Can I just make one point? I don't think you can say absent the money, Nick, because we have looked at, we've actually looked at these data. We know that working full-time and going to school, reduces your chances of getting a degree. And we know that disproportionately, Latinos and African Americans work full-time and try and go to school.
Sure. And what I'm saying is that over the last five years or so, the amount of money that have gone out, say, in the form of Pell Grants, which significantly go to those particular populations, that has not yielded any remarkable increase in result. In fact, it's resulted in a decline in the rate. So I don't think it's just a question of money. There's something else at work here. I don't disagree with you that there needs to be continued investment in these programs, but I think it's a fair question to say what's going on underneath the fiscal question.
Jack, one statistic, and then I'll let you turn it over. We did a study a couple years ago in the CSU looking at the impact of the recession on the students. One of the things we found that was absolutely shocking to me, we were asking about the parents' ability to help support the kids. What we got back from Latino students being the highest, 40%, said, no, I'm supporting my parents. It's not that my parents are supporting me.
And Patricia, did you get the chance to state your policy solutions to this as you?
Yeah, I wanted to go to community colleges, so thank you.
Okay, good. All right, so we're going to open it up. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for such great ideas, and I'm struck, Nick, by your point that you want to see how you can enable scale and create incentives for transformation. And yet, at the same time, we have organizations such as the Department of Education and our accrediting bodies that are they're fixated on the Carnegie Credit Hour. And so, all other things being equal, what would happen if we had a policy solution that you couldn't have an ad in any newspaper or any job description that said must have a college diploma? I say that because here in Sacramento, we have the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, which at one point only had 2 jobs in the entire utility that required a college degree, electrical engineer and lawyer. So other than that, every other job was a high school entry degree. So I think that we're seeing a sense that it's an entry step for employment that's a false entry step. And I don't think we're going to get the 30% with the high school graduation and 30% with training as long as we allow ourselves to have a culture where you must have a BA to even apply for a job.
So the concern here is that how do you think the world would change if it was less about BA attainment as opposed to a credential attainment? Is that the question?
Or what we call, which goes back to what Bill said about what is the quality product you're producing and how do you measure that quality?
And I think so, just on that question, and then I'll address your point about the atmospherics, at least at the federal space around these programs. I would say that it's a tough question. What is quality? What is the credential of value? And a lot of that really depends on the particular student, right? And that's why we're very vague. We don't say everybody or we need to double the rates of BA attainment here in our country. It's really about what is a credential that fits your particular personal need and goals that allows you to live the life that is, you get some income and you're able to sort of care for your family and the other things that you want to care for. And so I think that may have part of the reason, part of the cause, the root cause that you're talking about here. I think the challenge in Washington, when you talk about accrediting bodies in the Department of Education, I will separate those two because I think the Department of Education is a little bit more willing to be considerate of additional different kinds of programs than the accrediting bodies are, is simply the fact that the folks that sit in those chairs, the folks that sit in these chairs, don't know what that world looks like. People don't understand what competency-based education is. People don't understand that there are actually ways that a distance education company can deliver education in a manner that has similar or potentially even higher educational quality. And that's a challenge. It's an education. It's very different from me sitting at my desk at a nice college with nice ivy walls, and from different from the world that we're seeing today. And I think part of that gets to the awareness question once again. What do the opportunities look like? What do the safeguards look like? What is the quality metric that allows somebody to demonstrate that this education is like this education? These are tough questions, and they're occasionally heated debates. And so I don't think that will fully solve the problem that you've identified, which is a real problem, but I think it's certainly one of the images that people have in their mind about what is needed to be productive in this workforce.
But see, I think your question also relates to Bill's point that I'm not sure how applicable it is to the United States. He mentions Germany, in which they have these kind of apprentice tracks. You don't get a BA degree, but you get a technical degree, and then you get an apprenticeship with a BMW or something. it's, a lot of those jobs don't require, a higher education degree. Is that, Bill, is that relevant to the United States? I mean, how would you even, given the accreditation and the whole concept and the points that Nick just made about the conception of this,
I'll tell you something.
how could that be done?
We used to talk about college readiness, and what we meant is we want to get kids into college. So now we're talking about college readiness, and it's not simply getting students into college, it's getting students through college. The next thing we will talk about is getting students not only through college, but getting a job. Now, I know that there's lots of other things that you learn when you go to college. However, for those students that I work with who are the first generation, low income, never set foot in a college before they went, what we're facing in this economy is that they get to senior year, and in terms of social capital, they haven't developed it in terms of getting a job. And that has to change. It doesn't necessarily mean, I'm not saying that we should Xerox what Germany does and bring it over here, but the manner in which we have structured K through 12 and higher education is no longer efficient or effective or functional for us, and there have to be significant changes.
Bill, that's interesting that you say that they're getting to, your students at USC get to their senior year and have not developed social capital, because
I actually mean students at UCLA. No, I mean, I hate...
Then I really am going to disagree. Because we have a number of studies that show that people generally find their first jobs through other people.
Right.
And that's one of the big problems, is if you're sitting in a room somewhere with a computer, that doesn't introduce you to anybody.
And I would push back on that.
Okay, you can push back in a second.
Okay.
But it also has a great deal to do with where we send students to school, because who you meet in school is going to be very important for your future.
You're absolutely right. And I'm not actually, I wasn't being facetious when I said UCLA, because, for over a decade now, I've got a writing program and a mentoring program working with low-income first-generation students, most of whom either go to the UC or the CSU. Some of them go other places, Dartmouth, SC, or whatever. The challenge that we're facing now, because of the recession, is that academic services and career services at public institutions have been cut back. Class sizes have been increased. The economy is harder to get a job. And what we're facing is the students that once they graduate from high school and go on to college, they're now seniors. And they're now facing, I haven't thought about this. I don't know how to navigate, and I don't know anybody. And that's why I say when we first talked about college readiness, we didn't talk about college completion, and now that's part of the discourse. I'm predicting the next part of that will be, once you're done, assuming you get through, because we have grade inflation. It comes back to your point. And grade inflation, the students that I work with, I stay with. So it's like graduate school. They get Bs, they're first-generation students, and they think, I got a B. I'm doing okay. I got a 3.0. I know as a faculty member, what I'm saying when you're a junior or senior in college that you got a B, you're not too good. But I'm not going to fight that battle because nobody else has fought that battle. So we've got students who are graduating without the social capital with a 3.0, 3.3 GPA, but they're not prepared for the workforce.
And what I'm saying is that folks have already moved to that part of the conversation. Right. They've already moved to the employment conversation. In fact, if you were to talk to policymakers in Washington, that is the issue they go to first.
Right.
They don't go to the completion issue. They go to the jobs issue, because that's what they're hearing a lot about from their constituents, frankly.
I think we had another question. Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Really very interesting panel. And the thing that really strikes me about California is that a state in which 1 out of every 2 babies today is born from a Mexican or a Latina mother still stigmatizes bilingual education. And when you talk about college preparedness and how to make sure that they are good in the job market, I know for a fact, by working with immigrants, that a big difference would be to have bilingual counselors, bilingual teachers, bilingual people who could understand them. Now, I know that there's a political background around this issue, but I also think that there's a war of ideas, una guerra de ideas, in which in that war of ideas, the supporters of bilingual education, even after the Latino vote, even after the Latino tsunami, seems to be losing, because I don't hear the other side saying, no, this is not supported by science. California needs 8,000 bilingual teachers. I don't know how many, Patricia, but why we are not hearing that even in the middle of a tsunami in which California is in terms of its Latino population?
Who would like to?
Well, I know I was speaking with Senator Padilla recently about this. I know that there are people who are interested in trying to change the policy in California. It was short-sighted, it was uninformed, it was run over people by folks who knew nothing about the subject but thought that it was, a political vehicle to someplace else, and it has hurt us. And we now have about 12 or 13 years worth of evidence of simply how much it has hurt us. And so I'm hoping, what I'm seeing, however, in the schools is increasingly a decision to just not pay attention to that law. Glendale Unified School District now has dual language programs for virtually all of its students in 5 different languages. Progressive places have decided that it was bad policy, we're not going to follow it. But I would certainly personally like to see the political will rise up and say, we're going to do what the science tells us would be better, rather than, what prejudices we bring to the topic.
Okay. Any next question? Yes.
David, I want to ask you a follow-up question regarding...
Could you just hold on just a sec? You're going to go.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question regarding your assertion that online education won't be a money saver, but may in fact actually cost a little more. And that is, if you make the initial investment, might that initial investment be amortized over time so that there might be savings? And then a follow-up question to that is, and this is to all of you, is there any hope of what Governor Brown hopes to pursue in terms of greater efficiencies in higher education, not just as a result of online learning, but potentially other approaches, and understanding that that may represent a relatively small piece of the solution, and it still begs the question of efficiency toward what goal?
So I'll take the first 2 parts that were addressed to me. My assertion that it will not save much money assumes that we continue to rely on a model where the faculty member owns the classroom. And the classroom may be a physical space or it may be an online space, but if we assign that to a faculty member, there'll be no cost savings from online education, because it turns out not to be the case that you can teach 20 in a classroom and 100 online. You can't. You can teach 20 in a classroom, you can teach 20 online. So as long as we're hostage to the idea that the classes have to be developed and taught by faculty, it either costs the same or it costs more. Now, the second part of your question is more interesting, and it gets to something that I think Bill was saying, which is that if we developed, for example, a very good online version of English 101, and we distributed that to all of the colleges and universities in California, there could be substantial savings there, right? Because the online, the instructional part of the class is done once for thousands of students, and then there is support work that's done in the classroom to ensure that that their writing is graded, that other things happen in the classroom. But we're a long way from seeing that happen, because we're still, I mean, and I'm a faculty member, so I mean, I use pejorative language, but it hurts me too. But we're still prisoners of the idea that if we don't have a PhD in front of those kids, it's not a real class, and there are no economies of scale available there. I would assert. Maybe my colleagues disagree.
Here's what I see is going to happen, and I think credits eventually will go away, but I don't think they're the first to go away. But the bill that's been put before the legislature and discussed about the 50 biggest classes will be offered online, and then the faculty say no, they won't. But it's a very thin bill, but one of the things that it says is you can only take this class in, let's say, English 101, if all the other English 101's regular seat time are full. Okay, there are two assumptions about that. One is that the online class is worse than the sitting in the 500-student amphitheater, where really the fifth row is distance learning, right? So I think that's an old-fashioned thought of technology. And maybe, is it impossible to think that we can offer a class that is not as good or even better? But the other part of that I think is interesting is that was made so that the faculty wouldn't really get angry, right? You have to sit in my class before you take the technology. Now think about that for a moment. So let's go back to 1972. Patricia and I invent this thing called an automated teller. And we put them all over the city. And we say, you can't use it if the bank is open. Only if the bank is closed can you get money out of that. How long would that last? Not possible. So what we're going to see is that some class is going to be built that is first rate. And then we're going to recognize that we accept these classes. And then in terms of efficiencies, the learning will be speeded up because all of us, these long summers, that's not the way it works anymore. And the problem is that some of us have to work in the summer, but if we can take something at home, that's what's going to happen, I think.
Yeah, and I'll just make a comment that that actually I was kind of pleased to see Darrell Steinberg's bill because I think it opens up the conversation and gets people thinking creatively. And I know that's what Darrell wanted to do, too. I don't think he was throwing down a gauntlet. I think he really wanted to open up the conversation and defend the kids who can't get the courses. David, I think if we were to envision hybrid models, which is basically what you're saying, is a hybrid model where it isn't just all in front of a computer in some place, but I think that there's great potential for that. And so I wouldn't close it off as long as we still get those young people together with mentors and faculty members and other students who are headed in the same direction.
I'd like to add also the point that even if it's the same cost, it doesn't mean that it's not valuable. USC is partly for the social capital argument is not pursuing online education for undergrads because they want this networking, they want the growing up, the maturing, et cetera. They're only doing it for professional master's degrees. That's their strategy. It costs just as much, as you point out, for the reasons you point out, but it reaches a whole lot of people that could never have gotten that degree without that technology. Somebody like my daughter, living in Michigan, who can now get a degree from USC. She's a mother. She, works full time. She wouldn't be able to do that. Now she can. And so it will expand access, even if it's the same cost. So I just wanted to make that point. Yes.
So my response to your question is I hope the answer is yes, because if it's not, then I should tell Bill and Melinda to take their toys and go home. Because that's what we're doing. What we're doing is helping design those tools that will get to that efficiency with obvious fidelity to quality. And I think the reality of whether that happens or not partially will be as a result of the incentives that are set in place, whether it's legislative bills or funding situations. You see people responding to those incentives already and finding efficiencies. And I think I think the one point that I will raise, I'm not going to obviously talk about what those efficiencies might be or not. I think the one important point to make here is that I hope that some of those efficiencies find themselves to the students. Because the whole reason why we do it is because we want it to be cheaper for a student to go. And it's very easy, unfortunately, for the current tools that are there to say, oh, I'll do this, that's great. I can save some money now, and I can spend it somewhere else, as opposed to actually passing the savings on to the students who need the affordability.
That's a good point.
Can I just raise the obvious policy question, which that when we start to talk about online education, the obvious policy question is who gets paid, right? That the way that we pay for higher education now is we pay institutions to provide courses to students and to hire their faculty. If the class is not delivered in the traditional way, if it comes from an online provider, if it's available to multiple institutions, that just throws the whole question of who gets paid into the air. And we're in Sacramento. I suspect you all spend a lot of time thinking about who gets paid and how they get paid, and it's not a simple question. And that I think that's what's ultimately at stake, is that if we have quality online experiences available, the Gates Foundation will pay for some of them. Stanford will underwrite Coursera or Udacity to produce some of them, but those are trivial resources in the context of the scale of the problem we're talking about. And we have to rethink how we pay for education and how do we ensure that students get the services they need and not just the institutions get the budgets they think they deserve.
Good point. Do we have one last question, possibly, before we... Yes, over here.
I want to go back to what I heard you say, Dr. Knott, in your comments, and I think Nick Lee as well, and I'd like to, and that is, I didn't really hear an urgency or a passion for additional funding for students. I heard you say we're spending $150 billion a year in Pell, and that's such a huge number, but I've spent 40 years in student aid, and Pell is a pittance. It's a pittance. It's $5,000 for the neediest student, which will not even purchase a year at a community college when you go for rent and food, and the 40% who are helping their families, et cetera. And I really hope, I hear all these discussions of maturing higher ed, efficiencies, changes, reducing costs, but at the heart of it, we need a Pell Grant program that's closer to $1 trillion than $150 billion. We need a state of California that understands you can't hold Cal Grant steady for private colleges all these years and then reduce it and expect students to afford it. We need understanding of food, room and board, books and supplies, the total cost of higher education. So here's my question in your research, and I think perhaps, Nick, in your work you have done this. If you hold constant true affordability, that is, you take the lowest income ethnic student, the unprepared, and you get them into a college like an Amherst or a Williams or a Stanford, where they are truly fully funded, where they don't just get 5,000 Pell, but they get 45,000 from that college so that they can actually afford to go there, then do you see the success rate? And how do we go and look at the fact that we simply don't fund our students at this time? Where we go with success in that kind of funding. I don't want us to give up on that.
And what I'll say is that certainly in any conversation that I have and any conversation that my grantees have, that is the first thing that we lead with. I don't think any one of us are saying that we don't want to see more funding for higher education. I think the challenge is that certainly in the federal environment, if that is the first thing that's out of your mouth, they're not going to hear the second and third or fourth thing that comes out of your mouth either. And that's the concern.
But we can't just rely on the second, third, fourth. We have to continue with that message.
Jack, you also opened up, I think you opened up with our 14th place, right?
Yeah.
The way that happened is because we began disinvesting in higher education while Europe and our competitor nations started investing in higher education. It's not an accident. It's highly correlated, our disinvestment and our drop to 14th place.
All right. Is there anybody else on the panel that wants to have a final word and hasn't had a chance to say something that they would like to say?
Can I just say one thing?
I knew yes.
We all know and love California best, but this is not a unique problem to California. This is happening across the United States.
Yeah,
so it's not that we're facing it, that we're a uniquely stupid state or that we made a big mistake, but that this is a phenomenon that's general across states and not unique to California.
Very good. So I think this has raised the controversies as well as the issues and the dimensions of the challenge ahead of us, both at the federal and state and local levels, both across ethnicities, which is a huge issue as well. So I hope you found this thought-provoking, as I indicated, but also informative. So I'd like you to really join me in thanking Bill, David, Patricia, and Nick for a fine panel.
Well, thank you all very, very much for coming. I'd like to acknowledge our distinguished panelists, and thank you, Jack, for doing such a great job as our moderator. On behalf of the Price School, I'd like to thank USC Government Relations, the Stanford Pace Center, who is providing the videography for this event, and the video will be available on their website, and we will also have a link to that on our website. The USC Civil Rights Project, the Gates Foundation.
UC Civil Rights Project.
The Civil Rights Project.
You've been privatized.
Yeah. It sounded like a good idea. I thought I'd claim it. The USC Rossier School and the California Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very, very much.